Good morning. Today we are going to talk about Yudhakandam part 3 of Kambaramayanam. In part 2, we finished off Indrajithan using the Brahmastram against Lakshmanan and his army, and everybody drops unconscious. And Rama comes to the battlefield a bit later because he was not there when Brahmastram was used, and Rama is also faints and falls unconscious. Indrajithan thinks that everybody is dead, and he returns back to his palace and tells Ravana that everybody is dead now. Ravana now presumed that he has won the war, and he was very pleased with Indrajithan and wanted to celebrate, wanted to have a big celebration. And before the celebration, he wanted Sita to go to the battlefield and see that Rama is dead. He felt that if Sita saw Rama's dead body, she might actually accept Ravana. When he wanted Sita to see the battlefield, he wanted her to think that this is a complete victory for the Asuras. Many of his soldiers also dead. Many of the Asuras were also lying dead on the battlefield. So he told his people to remove all the bodies of the Asuras and throw them into the ocean. And he wanted Sita to see what good warriors they were, and that they won the war completely without much loss on their side. So the dead bodies of Asuras were removed and they were thrown into the sea. Sita was now brought to the battlefield in the Pushpaka Vimanam, and she was accompanied by her usual companion Tirisadai. Tirisadai, as you know, is Vedanan's daughter, and she's been helping her a lot while she was in the Asokavanam. She was lamenting in many ways, and she was going on about how unlucky she was, and it's only after marrying her Rama lost his kingdom, was sent to the forest for 14 years. And she also said that all this time she has suffered and waited for him has gone wasted. She wanted to hold his body as a king. She didn't want to hug a dead body. And she says, you were the life of all of our people. You were the strength of all of the devas, and you were like our king. You were like the nectar which gave us life, and I can't bear this anymore. Enna mayalodum irundadu nin punnagiya meni porundiravo Mannar Uire, Imayor Valiye, Kanne, Amirde, Karunagarane. She looks at Lakshmanan, and Lakshman is meant to be protecting Rama, and she is saying to Lakshman, what has happened to you, and why are you lying dead here? Did you die before him, and did you actually keep the promises that you made to your mother? Did you obey the orders that your mother gave you before you left for the forest? There is an interesting story here, which is one of the nicest parts of Kambaramayanam. Back in Ayodhya, when Rama was preparing to go to the forest, and everything happened within one day really. As soon as Kaikeyi told Rama that he needs to spend 14 years in the forest, he left on the very same day. And Lakshman wanted to go with him, even though Rama was against that. But Lakshman said there was no way that he could live in the palace without Rama being there. And they all go and go and meet their mothers to say about what's happened. And Lakshman goes to his own mother Sumitra to say that he is going with Rama to the forest. And Sumitra was not worried one bit. She said that where Rama is your world and where Rama is living is Ayodhya for you, and he is your king and he is your father now, and you have to go with him. And after saying that, she stops for a moment and then says something else to her son. She says, my son, I want you to go with Rama not as his brother but as his servant. You should go there to serve for him and not go there as his brother at all. And then she says, I want the two of you to come back together. I want Rama to come in front and with you behind him. If Rama doesn't come back, I don't want you to come back. I would have presumed, or I would have preferred if you lost your life before Rama. And this is what actually a mother says to her own son before sending him off with Rama. So Sita remembers what Sumitra told Lakshman, and she's crying and says, have you actually obeyed your mother's command to you and died before Rama died? Pinnum pakarval magane, ivan pen sel, தம்பி எனும்படி அன்று அடியாரின் ஏபல் செய்தி மன்னும் நகர்க்கே இவன் வந்திடும் வா அது அன்றேல் முன்னம் முடி என்றார். And if he doesn't come, you die before him, is what a mother says to her son. Now, finally, Sita is crying, and then she looks at Rama, and she probably wants to hold him, and she's trying to jump off Pushpaka Vimanam. And now Tirisadai actually stops her. She says, this probably looks like a magic or a maya that the Asuras have created, and let's have a close look at this. Now Tirisadai, after very closely observing, says many arguments to suggest that this is maya. She says, look at the faces of your husband and Lakshman. They don't look like dead people. There is a glow in their face still, and I think they are unconscious and probably not dead. And then she also looks at some of the surviving warriors. A few of them have survived, and they were all standing around the lying bodies of Rama and Lakshman, and they were guarding them. They seemed to be waiting for someone, and perhaps they were waiting for Vedanan and Jambavan to come to really sort the situation. And finally, Tirisarai also tells, because she was there in Ashokavanam, when Hanuman visited her, and she really blesses Hanuman and gives him a very long life. And Tirisarai says, how is it that your blessing can go wrong? Hanuman is also lying there, and Hanuman cannot be dead. If you based your blessing on your chastity, it's simply not possible that Hanuman could be dead. I believe Hanuman is also alive. And finally, she says something she must have just remembered. The Pushpaka Vimanam doesn't carry one dead body, so obviously it cannot carry a person who's dead, but apparently it cannot also carry somebody whose husband has died. I think to be politically correct, we need to assume that it doesn't carry someone whose other half has died. And therefore, Tirisadai says it is not possible that your husband has died, otherwise you wouldn't be able to travel or even be on the Pushpaka Vimanam. I think Sita is convinced about this argument, and she is consoled a little bit. By then, the Asuras take her back to Ashokavanam on the Pushpaka Vimanam.
Now the scene shifts to the battlefield, and in the battlefield, Vedanan, who had gone looking for food for the soldiers, comes back. Rama had sent him to procure food for the army, and when Vedanan comes back, he is shocked to find everybody unconscious on the battlefield. He finds Jambavan, and both of them go looking for Hanuman. They see Hanuman lying wounded. They remove all the arrows from his body, and Hanuman regains consciousness. And then Jambavan tells Hanuman to go to the Sanjeevani mountains and bring back life-restoring herbs. Hanuman immediately departs. The Sanjeevani mountain is very far away. He passes by Mount Kailasa, where he bows down to Shiva and Parvati. Then he flies past the great Meru mountain and finally reaches the Sanjeevani mountain. When he reaches this Marundu Malai, this mountain full of medicinal plants, he doesn't waste time in trying to locate the right plants. He simply uproots the entire mountain and brings it with him to Lanka. Even before he lands on Lanka's soil, as he is hovering above Lanka in the sky, the odor from the medicinal plants wafts down, and all the Vanaras who are lying unconscious come back to life. Ilakkuvan comes back to life, Sugrivan comes back to life, the entire army is restored. Unfortunately for Ravana, not a single Asura is there among them. All their bodies had been disposed of and thrown into the ocean. Once again, Ravana receives a defeat at the hands of Dharma. If he had not deceived Sita into believing that the Asura soldiers were alive, that his victory was complete, the Asura soldiers would have indeed come back to life and he would have gained his army back.
At the same time as this is happening in the battlefield, Ravana is out for celebration, and he is celebrating with a lot of his women, and there is really a lot of noise there, a lot of drinking and dancing going on within the palace. There are many songs and there are many scenes here which cannot be fully described, but Kamban tries to describe one scene where he tells a little moral story. I mean, he describes women there and they are all drunk. Their clothes are actually falling off, and he uses this scene to really say something. In Tamil literature, we often use the word keelor for people of low caliber, people who are not very good people. Keelor means low level, people of low level, and we use the terminology melor for really the educated and good-mannered people as melor. And he says that one of the things that he observed, so he looks at a woman, she's completely drunk and she's moving from one place to the other, and the clothes are really falling off her, the top and the waist, they are falling off. And at the same time, when the clothes are falling off, her hair is really falling in front and hiding really the exposed parts of her body. And he says that reminds him of how the lower people of the lower level would do nasty things, and in spite of that, the people at the upper level would cover up for them. And he describes the lower level as the clothes that the woman is wearing, and the higher people as the hair that comes in order to rescue that woman. வேத்தவை கீழோர்கள் கீழ்மையே விளைத்தார் மேலோர் சீர்த்தவர் செய்யத்தக்க கர்மமே செய்தார் என்ன. The low level people keep doing nasty things, and in spite of that, the nicer people will always do the better things to cover this up. Here Kamban uses something that Thiruvalluvar uses in Thirukkural, and Thiruvalluvar is probably around 800 to 1,000 years before Kamban, and Kamban uses very similar words. He says, Sayarkariya Seivar Periyar, Siriyar Sayarkariya Seigaladar. I mean, the only difference here is instead of Melor, Keelor, he uses the word Periyar and Siriyor. I mean, Siriyar standing for the bad people who are small. Siriya means small, and Periyar is big, are the good people who do the better things. And I think in many places Kamban really quotes Thiruvalluvar, and it's a little funny that he uses this pun in a situation like this. So in the middle of all this celebration, dancing and drinking, Ravana suddenly hears the twang of Rama's bows in Mithila during the Swayamvara. When he broke the bow, the whole world could hear that sound. It was so loud. Ravana hears this sound, and it's a very distinct sound for him. And he realizes that his enemies are alive. And then it ends, the celebration all comes to an end when Ravana realizes that there is more war looming and Rama is still alive.
The sound of Rama's bow strikes fear into the heart of Indrajit. Indrajit says to Ravana, "Father, our enemies have survived the Brahmastra. That is my strongest weapon, and they have survived the Brahmastra. It is next to impossible to defeat them now, but I will try once more. I will go to the temple of the goddess Nikumbala. I will do a yagam for the goddess Nikumbala, and I will invoke her and get her power, and her power will make me undefeatable once more." He also tells Ravana that I will disguise an Asura woman to look like Sita, and I will kill her in front of Hanuman, so that Rama will become demoralized. He then proceeds to do just that. He takes an Asura woman, he transforms her into Sita, and he takes this Maya Sita to the north gate of Lanka where Hanuman is waiting. Indrajit is very clever. He chose to behead Maya Sita in the presence of Hanuman because he realized how much Hanuman cares for Sita. You see, he was present in Ravana's assembly when Hanuman came to Lanka, and when Hanuman pleaded with Ravanan to release Sita, so he realized that Hanuman cared for Sita deeply. So when Hanuman sees this Maya Sita, he doesn't know it is magic. He begs with Indrajit. He says, Indrajit, you are descended from Brahma himself. You are from the line of the great sage Pulattiya. Do not do this base act. Do not kill a helpless woman. But Indrajit beheads Maya Sita in the presence of Hanuman. Hanuman is overcome with sorrow. Amme, amme, he weeps. Hanuman is the only one in the entire Ramayana to call Sita as Amma. That means he loved her as much as he loved a mother. So Hanuman says, I went to Rama and told him very proudly that I had found you in Lanka and that you were safe and sound. Will I now go to Rama and tell him that you are dead? How can I do that? Indrajit then warns Hanuman. Indrajit says, I am going to Ayodhya and I will go to Ayodhya and kill Bharata and the rest of Rama's family. So Hanuman rushes to Rama with the bad news. He tells Rama, Sita is dead and Indrajit is on his way to Ayodhya to kill your brother.
I mean, this sounds like a disaster now. Rama comes to rescue Sita and everything was about taking her back alive, and now it appears that Sita has been killed. I think this must have been the lowest point in the life of Rama and for everyone who's come to wage a war. I think the whole world stops for them.
Indeed, and Kamban says that Raman seyalatru ponan. Raman could not move a finger, he just collapsed. Sita was dead and his brothers and mothers in Ayodhya were in danger. This was too much for him to bear. Ilakkuvan burst out in anger. He said to Rama, Rama, Indrajitan has killed Sita and you are sitting here doing nothing. Tayyalai, Tunaiyilalai, Tavattiyai, Dharma Karpin Deivam Tannai, Matru un Deviyai, Thiruvai Thinda, Veyyavan Kondran Yendral, Vedanai Udappadu innum Uyyavo, Karunayalo, Dharmattodu Uravamundo. He says, Rama, Indrajitan has grabbed and killed Sita. First of all, she is a woman, Tayyalai. Secondly, she is a helpless woman, Thunaiyilal. Thirdly, she is a Tavatti, she is a woman who is doing penance. And then she is Dharma Karpin Deivam, she is the goddess of virtue. More than anything else, she is your wife, another man's wife. And she is the goddess of wealth. Indrajitan kills Sita and you are sitting here without fighting, without taking up your bow and arrow. Are you showing mercy to your enemies because you are adhering to Dharma? Does this Dharma still exist? Now, at this point, Hanuman is concerned for the safety of Bharata. He says to the two brothers, I will take you on my shoulders, let us rush to Ayodhya and protect Bharata. Vedanan is looking upon this scene and Vedanan feels that something is wrong here. Vedanan says, Rama, if Sita is dead, Dharma will come to an end. If Dharma comes to an end, this world will come to an end. There will be a catastrophic event, the world will be destroyed. But look around you, everything is fine, the world is fine. That means Dharma is still present, which means Sita is still safe. I will go and find out what happened to Sita. So Vedanan takes the form of a bee, a vand, and he goes into the Ashokavanam and he finds Sita sitting in her usual place under the Simsuba tree, meditating. But he also sees Indrajitan leaving for the temple of Nikumbala with his massive army. So Vedanan comes back and tells Rama the good news. He says, Rama, Sita is safe and sound, but Indrajitan is going to do the Nikumbala Yagam. If you do not kill Indrajitan now, if you do not stop Indrajitan now, he will gain powers from the Nikumbala, from the goddess Nikumbala. He will remain undefeated no matter what we do. So we have to stop Indrajitan now. There is no time to lose. Immediately, Ilakkuvan and Sugrivan and the Vanara army depart for the forest to the temple of Nikumbala. Once they reach there, the Vanara army destroys the elaborate preparations that have been made for the Nikumbala Yagam. Ilakkuvan fights with Indrajitan. Indrajithan throws all that he has on Ilakkuvan. Indrajithan uses all his most powerful weapons to fight Ilakkuvan. Indrajithan shoots the Narayanasram on Ilakkuvan. The Narayanasram does pradakshanam to Ilakkuvan and comes back to Indrajit. The Narayanasram actually pays respect to Ilakkuvan and goes around him and comes back to Indrajit. Now the Narayanasram is the weapon of Lord Narayana, and Rama is a reincarnation of Narayana. Will the Narayanasram harm a hair on the head of Ilakkuvan, a man who has been guarding Rama for 13 years in the forest without sleeping for one moment? Will the Narayanasram harm a hair on the head of Ilakkuvan, a man who gave up his life in the palace, gave up his wife, and came to the forest for the love of Rama? The Narayanasram worships Ilakkuvan. When Indrajithan sees this, he is shocked. Next, Ilakkuvan uses the Brahmastram. And when Ilakkuvan aims the Brahmastram at Indrajithan, he says a prayer. He says,
so that's the ultimate weapon that he was stopped from using by Rama earlier on. So he uses the ultimate weapon now.
Yes, and Rama at that time said, Nandru agaga ulagukku, let only good come to this world. So Ilakkuvan remembers that, and when he shoots the Brahmastram, he says a prayer. He says, let this Brahmastram not hurt any of the innocent people. Let this Brahmastram spare Indrajit's life. Let this Brahmastram only destroy his weapons. So, when Indrajit observes this nobility, this strict adherence to Dharma, he is shocked. This is not something he is used to. So, Indrajit's life is saved by Ilakkuvan, and he rushes back to Ravanan and he tells Ravanan, we cannot defeat these people. They are much more powerful than we thought. The Narayanasram is worshipping Ilakkuvan. I have never seen anything like this before. And even in the direst of moments, Ilakkuvan is adhering to Dharma. Beloved father, let us give up Sita and let us save ourselves. If we give up Sita, the enemies will go away, the war will stop, they will forgive us, and we can get on with our lives. Adalal anjinen என்று அருளலை ஆசைதான் அசீதைபால் விடுதியாயின் அனையவர் சீற்றம் தீர்வர் போதலும் பெறுவர் செய்த தீமையும் பொறுப்பர் நின்மேல் காதலால் உரைத்தேன் என்றார். He said, I am not saying this because I fear for my life, father. I am saying this because I love you and I want you to be alive. Ravanan is furious. He says, Pedamai uraithai pillai. You are being foolish. Do you think I went into this fight depending on the ability of my kinsmen, depending on the ability of my warriors? Do you think I went into this fight depending on you to win the war? No, I went into this fight because I trusted my own ability. முன்னையோர் இறந்தோர் எல்லாம் இப்பகை முடிப்பர் என்றும் பின்னையோர் நின்றோர் எல்லாம் வென்றனர் பெயர்வர் என்றும் உன்னை நீ அவரை வென்று தருதி என்று உணர்ந்துமல்லால் என்னையே நோக்கியான் என் நெடும்பகை தேடிக்கொண்டேன். Ravana is blatantly lying when he says என்னையே நம்பியான் என் நெடும்பகை தேடிக்கொண்டேன். The first day of war, when Rama defeated Ravana, he lost his courage, and then he sent Kumbhakarnan, he sent Adigayan, he sent Indrajithan and a bunch of warriors to fight on his behalf. He begged with them to carry on with the battle, to bring him victory, because he was afraid to go into battle. And now he lies to his only surviving son. He says, the victory in this battle rests entirely on my own shoulders. And he goes on to say, you want me to give up Sita? If I give up Sita, will the Devas in the heavens respect me as Ravana? I am Ravana, who has won over all my enemies in 8 directions. I will not give up Sita till the last breath leaves my body. விட்டனன் சீதை தன்னை என்றால் விண்ணோர் நன்னி கட்டுவது அல்லால் என யான் எனக் கருதுவாரோ பட்டனன் என்ற பொழுதும் எளிகிலில் படிகிலேன் யான் எட்டினோடு எட்டுமான திசைகளும் எரிந்து வென்றேன். Now, he gives a rationale, he gives a warped reason for continuing with this futile battle. He says, even if Rama were to kill me, as long as Rama's name lasts, my fame will last. He says, வென்றிலன் என்ற பொழுதும் வேதம் உள்ளளவும் யானும் நின்றிலன் அன்றோ மற்ற விராமன் புகழ் நிற்குமாயின் பொன்றுதல் ஒரு காலத்தும் தவிருமோ பொதுமைத்தன்றோ இன்றுளர் நாளை மாழ்வார் புகழுக்கும் இறுதி உண்டோ. He said, he says, all those who are born will die one day. Death is inevitable. But if I die at the hands of Rama, I will be known forever as Rama's adversary. I will gain fame. I will become famous for being Rama's adversary. Ravana is totally confused. This is Ravana steeped in narcissism. He completely lacks empathy and he has got a misplaced sense of self-importance. More than anything else, he is confused about dharma. Rama is fighting for dharma and Rama will be venerated for generations to come because of this. Ravana will be reviled for his intolerable cruelty to a helpless woman. But then, like all bullies, he tries to disguise his cruelty as bravado. He is confused between nobility and ignominy. Now, Indrajithan listens to this and Ravana is callously cruel. He says, go back to the palace and take care of your wounds. I will go into battle myself. Ravanan pretends to go to battle. Indrajithan falls at Ravanan's feet and says, don't go, father. I will go myself, but I will die in this battle. At least when I die, believe that what I said was the truth. Indrajithan.
Don't you think this is very similar to what happened with Kumbhakarnan also? He told Kumbhakarnan, if you are not going, I'm going to go to war. And then Kumbhakarnan says, no, my brother, you're my king. It's an order I take. And I go and don't think that I'm going to win the war, I'm going to die. It's exactly what his son is also saying to him.
That's right. And Indrajithan prepares to depart for his last battle. And like all warriors going on their last journey, he donates all his wealth to the poor people and he climbs into the chariot which has been given to him by none other than Lord Shiva himself. Padaikala vinjai matrum padaithana palavum tampal அடைக்கலம் என்ன ஈசன் தந்த தேர்மேலாக்கி கொடைத்தொழில் வெட்டோர்க்கெல்லாம் கொடுத்தனன் கொடியோன் தன்னை கடைக்கண்ணாலே நோக்கி நோக்கி இரு கண்ணீர் கழுலச் சென்றான். As Indrajithan departed, he turned back to look at Ravana and he kept on looking at Ravana. He hoped that at least in the last minute, Ravana will call him back and say, I cannot lose you, Indrajit, come back. You are my beloved son. You are more precious to me than Sita. Indrajit longed for this love from Ravana. Indrajit longed for Ravana to stop him from going to battle. Indrajit longed for Ravana to stop him from dying in battle. Of course, Ravana did no such thing. Ravana did not call back Indrajit because Ravana's passion for Sita was greater than his love for Indrajit. So Indrajit went into battle and he was brutally killed by Ilakkuvan. Even there, Ilakkuvan showed his righteousness and his adherence to dharma. You see, Ilakkuvan, you will find many times, Ilakkuvan speaks very insultingly about dharma, but he never veered from the laws of dharma. So when Ilakkuvan is about to shoot the final arrow at Indrajit, he says to the arrow, if Rama is truly the upholder of dharma, then may this arrow kill Indrajit. So the arrow severes Indrajit's head. Indrajit's head is taken to Rama. Rama is very happy. He is very proud of Ilakkuvan. But Rama gives credit for the victory to Vedanan. You see, when the Nagapasa Astram was fired and Ilakkuvan fell into a swoon, Rama wrongly blamed Vedanan. Rama said to Vedanan, you did not protect my brother. That was not fair. So Rama is making up for that now. Rama says the credit of this victory against Indrajit goes completely to Vedanan. The spies convey the news to Ravana that Indrajithan has been killed. Ravana is so furious, he draws out his sword and he cuts off their neck. He is seething with anger. He is also going through unbearable agony. He laments, மைந்தவோ என்னும் மாமகனே என்னும் எந்தையோ எனும் என் உயிரே எனும் முந்தினேன் உனை யான் உளனே எனும் வெந்த புன்னிடை வேல்பட்ட வெம்மையான். Kamban says, the agony he was going through was like driving a red-hot spear into a festering wound. That pain can only be imagined.
It's not often that Kamban describes every head of Ravana speaking at the same time. I think here he's really lamenting and every head is saying something.
That's right. This actually is a trait of Ravana. When he is extremely happy or when he is extremely sad, his 10 heads talk to each other. So when Hanuman first encountered him in his palace in Lanka, Ravana's 10 heads were doing different things at the same time. One head was attending to matters of government, one head was pining for Sita, another head was looking at the Arambayar or the Deva women who were surrounding him. Similarly now, when Indrajit dies, each head talks to the other and they are all lamenting the loss of Ravana's son. Now Ravana, bearing this unspeakable grief, goes to the battlefield to look for his son's body. He can't find the body. There is an arm lying in one corner. There is a leg lying in another corner. He picks up the arm. He wraps it around his neck. He smells it. He kisses it. He pretends to be in his son's embrace. And then he moans saying, Ariyunum malangal mauli idanda yen madala yakkai nariyunak kanden unin nayunum unavu nandra. My son's body has become the food for dogs. Now, I am going to rewind a bit and take you back to the Ashokavanam. In the Ashokavanam, when Ravana was torturing Sita, she cursed him. She said, Punmagan ketti, kettudarku uriyadu. Ninmagan uirai emmoi sumittirai uyya nindra. Nanmagan vali nakka, nayavan udalai nakka. Enmagan irandan என்று எடுத்து நீ அரற்றல் என்றாள். She said, I curse you, Ravana. Ilakkuvan will kill your son in battle. And you will bear his body parts and say and grieve that his body parts are being eaten by dogs. What Sita said came to pass. And now Ravanan gathered up all the body parts of Indrajit and went to Lanka. Mandodari, Indrajittan's mother, came running, beating her breasts. She said, Ayyane, Alagane, and Arumberal Amilde, Adi Kayyane, Maduvane, என்று அவர் வலிகடந்த கால மொய்யனே முளரி நின்முகம் கண்டிலாதேன் உய்வனோ உலகம் மூன்றுக்கும் ஒருவனே செருவலோனே. She said, my dear beloved son, you who conquered Indra himself have now been killed by the arrows of men. I cannot believe this. And then, like all mothers, she reminisced about his childhood. She said, will I see you once more playing with lions? Will I see you as a baby demanding to play with the moon? அஞ்சினேன் அஞ்சினேன் அச்சீதையெனும் அமுதால் தோய்ந்த நஞ்சினால் நாளை இலங்கை வேந்தன் இத்தகையனன்றோ. You died today because of Sita. Tomorrow, Ravana will die because of Sita. Mandodari realized that Sita is as pure as Amudam, the nectar of the gods. But for the Asuras, she is Nanju, she is poison. And so Mandodari, usually a woman will never talk about the death of her husband. But here Mandodari predicts the death of Ravana because she is overcome by grief at the loss of her beloved son. When Ravana hears this, he hears Mandodari blaming Sita, something snaps inside him. In one moment, the passion he had for Sita disappears. That passion just melts away. Ravanan is furious for Sita. He blames Sita for the death of Indrajit. He draws out his sword and he rushes out to kill Sita. Magodharan stops Ravanan and Magodharan tells Ravanan, what are you doing? Are you going to kill a woman? That is a great sin. Don't do it. Magodharan reassures Ravanan. He says, the battle may have been lost, but we will win the war. So finally, Ravanan does the last rites for his son. He says, for these last rites, I am not using water. I am using the tears of Sita. சினத்தோடும் கொற்றம் முற்றி இந்திரன் செல்வம் மேவி நினைத்ததை முடித்து நின்றேன் நேரிழை ஒருத்தி நீரால் எனக்கு நீ செய்யத்தக்க கடலெல்லாம் ஏங்கி ஏங்கி உனக்கு நான் செய்வதானேன் என்னென் யார் உலகத்துள்ளார்.
That's very, very sad actually. I think he says that I am doing the responsibilities. What a son should do for the father, a father does for a son. That's always a very, very sad moment for any father, that he has to do the last rites for his son.
He says, I who conquered Indra, who conquered Indra's world, is now doing last rites for my son, something my son should have done for me. And for this, I am using the water, not water, but the tears that Sita shed, the tears that I made her shed. So here, Ravana is actually blaming himself for all that happened. Ravana continues to fight. Ravana continues the battle. He sends the reserve army to fight the war. Rama destroys this Moola Bala Padai single-handedly, and now it is time for Ravana to return to war. And this is the final day of the war, the final day of the Rama-Ravana Yuddham.
The next scene is really the war between Ravana and Rama, and it's described as the Ravana Vadai Padalam. Ravana has been very worried to fight Rama after the first war, where he was defeated by Rama and asked to come back the next day. But after the killing of Indrajithan, he is really angry now, and he really wants to fight Rama once again. Whatever the outcome, he is going to war once again. Now, Ravana gets his chariot, and the chariot is one of the most beautiful of the chariots. It's very tall, up to the sky, and he's got this a flag with veena. He has an interest in music. Ravana has an interest in music, and he climbs on it. And once again, Kamban describes him as looking like the Vamana avatar of Vishnu, just like he described for Kumbhakarnan also. He's standing very tall. The Deva themselves are concerned that Ravana might have an edge over Rama now, because how he is equipped, because his chariot can actually fly, and Rama doesn't have any chariot like that. So Lord Shiva requests the Devas to help him, and Indra himself sends his chariot this time to Rama to use. And Indra's chariot and his charioteer Matali come in front of Rama, and now Rama is informed that Ravana is ready to fight now. And when Rama sees this chariot, again this is a huge chariot and very grand, and it can fly. And Rama couldn't believe, because he's been fooled many times by the Asuras, and there have been many Mayas. And he is actually wondering that if this is really a Maya done by the Asuras, whether this is actually a magic by Asuras. So he is consulting everyone. He is consulting Hanuman, and he is also consulting his brother. And they all agree that this is not a Maya, and this is the chariot of Indra himself, who sent it to help him.
You see, Rama has been battered and bruised by the Asuras. They brought Maya Sita in front of him. Magodharan made it appear like Indra was battling against the Asuras, and this is just two examples of the numerous magic tricks that the Asuras employed to confuse Rama and the Vanara army. So there is no surprise that Rama didn't believe that this was actually Indra's chariot. He thought it was the Asuras' magic.
Now, just before Ravana faces Rama, his general Mahodharan goes to war, and Mahodharan gets killed very easily by Rama. Kamban describes this very nicely. I think he described once again the childish Rama who's playing with his toy arrows, and he just throws one arrow and takes off one shoulder, one arm, another arm with another arrow, another leg with one arrow, and then his head with an arrow. And Kamban really describes him like a child's play for him to really kill the general of Ravana. And now Ravana really gets very angry, and he gets on his chariot, and this time he tells to himself, and he tells everyone, that there is going to be one of us who will be alive at the end of the day. I want to see at the end of today's battle, it will be either Sita who will be mourning, beating her chest for the loss of Rama, or Mandodari, Mayan's daughter, who will do the same thing that I said Sita would do. Mandralam Kural Sanahitan Malar Kayal, Vayiru Kondru Alandalai, Kodunadun Tuiridai Kulithal, Andru Idu Endridil, Mayan Mahal at Toril Urudal. So it's either this or that. Indru Irandin Wondru Akuven, Talaipadin and Ran. So I'll make one of these two happen at the end of today. Either Sita's crying, or Mayan Mahal, my wife, will be crying at the end of the day. So Ravana is really now convinced that this is going to be the last day of war, and this is going to be the last confrontation that he is going to have with Rama.
This is a very different Ravanan from the one we saw from the first day of battle. He has regained his courage and he is going to fight for the Asura pride, and this is a do or die battle for Ravanan.
Now Ravana is furious. He is in the battlefield and he is attacking Rama with all his weapons. Rama actually has a very defensive strategy to begin with. Perhaps he wants to tire out Ravana. This indicates previously it's always been that Rama is much stronger than anybody else he fights with. But here Rama actually plays it very safe. He is just deflecting the weapons of Ravana first rather than be on the offensive. And finally, I think Ravana has had enough and he uses a very deadly spear, a weapon on Rama. This always kills. This weapon was given to him by Mayan, Mandodari's father. So he throws this weapon at him and thinking that this is going to be the last thing. But Rama stands still, looks at the weapon and just says, just makes a little noise, and the weapon just shatters into pieces. Ravana is amazed. This could never happen, and Ravana is amazed. And it's only now that Ravana thinks, who is this man I'm fighting with? This must be God. He cannot be a human being. And have I come to fight a battle which I cannot win? It's only at this moment, actually, even though many people have told Ravana that this war cannot be won, it's this incident that he witnesses himself that makes him think that the man standing in front of him is no ordinary human being. So he says, Shivano Allan, so he's not Shiva, Nanmugan Allan, he's not Brahma either. Thirumalam Avano, he has this doubt whether he is Vishnu. So he says, Sivano Allan, Nanmugan Allan, Thirumalam Avano Allan, Meivaramellam Adhindran, Tavano Yennin Seidu Mudikum Taran Allan, Ivanodan Adveda Mudal Karanan Endran. Now he is thinking, is he the one supreme God who came at the beginning of the Vedas? Ravana is very arrogant. For a moment he thinks like that, and he's decided today that it's either going to be him or either he's going to lose or Rama is going to lose. So it didn't matter even if he was one supreme God, because he decided he's going to end it today. So he says, Yarenum dan aguga, yan yen thani an my peren, nindre venri mudipen puhal petrain. I think I'm going to get the fame today by fighting one supreme, the supreme God, because he has won the Mummurtigal. He's already won the three gods. So what does it matter? He says, I'm going to carry on with this fighting.
Yeah, at this point, you see a very courageous Ravana who is not afraid to even face off with God himself. At the same time, like you mentioned, you see a very arrogant Ravana who feels that he has the power to even win over the gods. This is the contrast in Ravana that Kamban beautifully brings out at every point during the characterization of this villain.
Next, the battle reaches a stage when Raman is now on the offensive. He starts attacking Ravana. And Raman is capable of throwing multiple arrows in a series of arrows. So he starts taking off Ravana's arm one by one, and also starts taking off his head one by one. Every time he takes the head off, the head grows back and starts abusing Rama. So Rama couldn't believe, and he's puzzled by this magic. Finally, I think with multiple times this happening, Ravana falls unconscious within the chariot. Now at this moment, Rama could have easily killed him when he's fallen unconscious on his chariot, but he leaves him be once again because he is weakened and doesn't have any weapons with him. And Ravana's charioteer very swiftly removes him from the battle site and takes him away, far away from the fighting place. Again, Ravana regains consciousness, and he can't understand why he is not in the battlefield fighting Rama. And now he is shouting at his charioteer to say, what have you done? Why am I here? And I think the charioteer explains to him, and he's angry, and he wants to be back in the battle with Rama once again, and the battle starts once again between Rama and Ravana. I think at the final stage of the war, Rama now uses a combination of two weapons. The Brahmastram, as you know, a very powerful weapon, as well as the Sudarshana Chakram that Vishnu uses. He uses both of them, and these two weapons together kills Ravana, and Ravana falls off the chariot. And Kamban describes the last weapon that he uses, the last arrow that he uses against Ravana very beautifully. He says, Mukkodi Varnalum, Muyendrudeya Perundavamum, Mudalvan Munnal Yekkodi Yaralum Vellapadai Yanakodutta Varamum, Yenai Tikkodum Ulahanaithum Serikadanda Puya Valiyum Tindru, Marbil Pukkodi Uyir Parhi, Puram Poitru, Ragavantan Punidavali. Kamban always describes the killing weapon, the killing arrows of Rama very beautifully. He's done that many times before, and when we talk about that, we'll describe that to you. He just doesn't say that this weapon enters his chest and drinks his life. That's the last thing he says. Puya valiyum tindru marbil pukkodi uyir parihi puram poitru raghavantan punidavali. He says it actually consumes his 3 crore day of life. It consumes all the tapas and the strength that he had from the prayers and the vara that was given to him, that he cannot be defeated by anyone. It also takes away the strength that he used to go in all directions, defeating everybody that he comes across. And finally, it removes his life from within his chest. And that's how he describes Rama's weapon taking the life of Ravana. Ravana falls face down from the chariot. He's a huge figure, so he's as soon as he is killed, he is face down on the ground. I think you describe it as biting the dust, I think. And all his 20 arms are outstretched as though it is hugging the soil. Rama sees his body from up there in the sky in his chariot, and the chariot is slowly descending down, and he is carefully looking at his enemy, at the dead body of the enemy. And he finds that he has wounds on his back. Finding wounds on the back of a soldier in a battlefield is not a very good thing in Tamil literature. A warrior is found dead, and if he's got wounds in the back, it indicates to people that he has not been fighting. He's trying to run away from the battlefield, and therefore he gets a wound in the back. They call it Puramudhu, wounds on the back. And that is not a good thing in Tamil culture. Even when a mother comes to inspect a dead son on the battlefield, and the mother finds that her son has got wounds in the back, the mother would disown that boy as her child. And Rama also feels a sense of shame, because he thought he had defeated a great warrior, and here he is defeated a warrior who's got wounds on his back, and he feels that this is not such a grave achievement anymore, that he has killed Ravana. So he speaks to Vidanan, and Vidanan hears this, and he gets extremely upset with Rama. He actually speaks to him very angrily. He tells Rama why he has these scars in the back. My brother bears the scars of bravery on his back. He's not been running away. He's never run away from the battlefield. He says that after defeating the Trinity of gods, Ravana went to fight everybody in every part of the world, and after defeating everyone, there was no one left to fight, and therefore he went to the 8 corners of the earth, and he fought with the elephants, Tisayanai, they are called the Tisayanai, the 8 elephants guarding the 8 corners of the earth. And these elephants are probably elephants with huge tusks, like the African elephants perhaps, not like the Indian elephants. So the tusks of these elephants pierced his chest and went through the chest from front to back, and broke on his chest. And he was carrying these like victory trophy. And he says, it's these tusks which entered the front and scarred the back that caused the wounds in the back. It's not because he was running away from anybody's battle. And finally he says to Rama himself, Rama, you think you won my brother Ravana very easily, but the reason why you've been able to defeat him is not because he was a weak person. In fact, he became weak because of the love he had for a woman who should be worshipped like God. That was a disease that he acquired which made him weak. And also the curse of the Devas and your own, the strength that you have acquired from your prayers is what made you defeat. It's not that Ravana is weak and you're a stronger man than Ravana. That is not the reason why you won the war. ஆயிரம் தோழினாலும் வாலியும் அரிதின் ஐய மேயின வென்றி விண்ணோர் சாபத்தின் விளைந்த மெய்மை தாயினும் தொழத்தக்கால் மேல் தங்கிய காதல் தன்மை நோயும் நின் முனிவும் அல்லால் வெல்வரோ நுவலற்பாளார். It's the love which is a disease for him, which made you defeat him. And previously he lost to Vali and the other human who imprisoned him because of really the curse that he had from the Devas, which made him lose previously. And this time you only defeated him because of this disease of love that he had for a woman who should really be worshipped like God. He now looks at Ravana's body lying there, and he is really stricken with grief, even though he abandoned him previously. We have talked about how much the brothers loved each other. It's not that he did not love his brother. He tried to advise him, and then he left him to join Rama because he wanted to be on the side of Dharma. He thinks about Sita and how this happened, and just like how Mandodari described Sita as a poison, he also described Sita as a poison which was responsible for Ravana's death. He said, Unnade uyir unnadu oru nanju Sanaki ennum perunanju unnai kannale nokkave pokiyade uyir niyum kalappattaye என்னாதேன் எண்ணிய சொல் இன்று இனித்தான் எனதியோ எண்ணில் ஆற்றல் அண்ணாவோ அண்ணாவோ அசுரர்கள் தம் பெறலமே அமரர் கூற்றேன். He says, oh my brother, you're dead in the battlefield. You were our savior, all of the Asuras' savior, and you were also really the Yama for the Devas, and who is there now to protect the Asuras? And I told you before that you cannot win this battle. Do you even now realize that what I told you was right? And you've been, and I said that he described Sita as a poison. And he says it's more deadly poison than the normal poison that we see. He says most of the poisons will only kill when you consume them. Poison. You didn't even have to consume. You only had to look at her, and you have lost your life. And how poisonous is she? He blames his own sister Surpanagai because everything happened because of Surpanagai. It was Surpanagai who introduced Sita's beauty to Ravana, and Ravana fell in love just by how Surpanagai described Sita. And in fact, he says that the moment he heard about her, he locked her up in his chest, in the prison of his chest. And that's how the whole thing started. And he says that there is also another story that Ravana killed Surpanagai's husband, his sister's husband. Vedanan now thinks that it was all Surpanagai's revenge to kill Ravana which created all of that. கொல்லாத மைத்துனனை கொன்றாய் என்று அது குறித்து கொடுமை சூழ்ந்து பல்லாலே இதழக்கும் கொடும் பாவி நெடும்பார பகை தீர்த்தாலோ நல்லாரும் தீயாரும் நரகத்தார் துறக்கத்தார் நம்பி நம்மோடும் எல்லாரும் பகைஞரே யார் முகத்தே விழிக்கின்றாய் எழியானாய். He says, because you killed Surpanagai's husband, I think this is just a revenge by Surpanagai. And now you're dead, you're in the other world. You've been against everyone. You've been against our people, the Devas. And who are you facing now? In the other world, I wonder, he said. And he continues to lament over the dead body. He continues to cry, and he can't really stop thinking about how great his brother was. And he says, "You're hugging the soil with your 10 arms, but these are the arms which have previously been hugging the goddess of war and the goddess of victory, as well as the goddess of art, because he was very good with music and art, and also the goddess of fame." And with the arms that have been really hugging all of these goddesses, now what has happened to you? You're now hugging the goddess of earth. Por magalai, kalai magalai, puhar magalai, tazhaviya kai, puramai kura. Seer magalai, thirumagalai, devarkum theruvariya devakarpin, per magalai tazhuvan, uyir koduthu pazhikonda pitta, pinnai paar magalai taluvinayo, திசையானை பனை இருத்த பனைத்த மார்பா. Now it was the turn of Mandodari, Ravana's queen. She fell on his body and wept, saying that his flesh has been pierced extensively by Rama's arrows, leaving not even a tiny bit of space for sesame seeds to be sprinkled as part of the rites. I think they sprinkle water on the dead bodies and also sprinkle the sesame seeds on the dead body. And she says, how much wound is there? And their arrows have pierced every part of your chest. And she was wondering why. And in order to take his life, she knows that you only require one arrow from Rama's side. There's some other reason why the arrows have pierced him so many times. And I think she is the crowned queen of Lanka. And she is one of the most beautiful women there. Kamban describes her as beautiful as Sita. And Ravana would have had many, many wives. I think he's had thousands of wives there. It wouldn't have bothered Mandodari so much to see so many wives. But there is a difference with Sita. She obviously sees a difference with Sita because Sita is in the hearts of Ravana. And she would have known that as a wife, that he loved Sita more than he loved her. And she was wondering now, seeing the wound, whether the arrow actually went in and out of his body, looking for Sita, who was imprisoned within him. And Kamban describes this beautifully. Vellarikkam sadaimudiyaan verpedutha thirumeni melum keelum ellarukkum idamindri uyirukkum idam naadi ilaithavaro கல்லிருக்கும் மலர்க்கூந்தல் சானகியை மனச்சிறையில் கறந்த காதல் உள்ளிருக்கும் எனக் கருதி உடல் புகுந்து தடவியதோ ஒருவன் வாலி. Did this arrow get into his body and started looking all over the place for the love that Ravanan had for Sita?
I think at this moment she feels a selfish need that at least in death Ravanan should belong exclusively to her. So she says the arrow went in search of this love that he bore for Janaki, and this arrow removed that love out of him. So the Ravana who is lying here is exclusively mine.
Now actually Mandodari is also surprised that Ravana is lying dead, because she wouldn't have expected this. Even though he lost the first battle, she knew that he's had 3 crore days of life, and he has actually defeated the 3 gods. And she is asking him, who is lying dead there, how did I even imagine that you could be killed by a human being? And how is it possible that a man who has defeated all Devas and Shivan and Vishnu and Brahma be defeated by a human being? And how is it that all of the strength that you've acquired over the years by all of these prayers and all of this tapas could actually be overcome by 2 human beings? She says, I just cannot believe that this has happened. Devarkum, Tisai Karikkum, Sivanarkum, Ayanarkum, Senganmarkum, Evarkum Valiyanukku, Endru undam iruthi என்று ஏமாற்புற்றேன். I never thought you had an end. But ஆவர்கண் நீ உழந்த அருந்தவத்தின் பெருங்கடற்கும் வரமென்று ஆன்ற காவர்க்கும் வழியான் ஓர் மானுடவன் உளன் என கருதினானோ. I never thought that it's going to be a human being who's going to be stronger than all the strength that you have, that you've acquired through the tapas. And finally, Mandodari still, I think all of these, like all of these women, she's blaming herself as the person who's the unlucky one, and she says, no woman should live after her husband. I should have died first before you, and I'm in this situation where you're dead before me. And she puts her head, and she really falls on his body and gives up her life immediately at that moment. After this death, Kamban paid a huge tribute to Ravana. Kamban now said that in death, Ravanan's face glowed 3 times more than it did in his life. I think most people might look calm after death, but he says his face was bright after death, and this was because he was devoid of the wickedness after his death. He was devoid of his pride, devoid of the love that he had for another man's wife. And Kamban really describes, I think Kamban always had a liking for Ravana, his character, his bravery, even though he blamed him many times for what he'd done. I think once everything has left Ravana, he praises, he leaves it as a praise for Ravana. Vemmadangal vegunda anaya, sinamadanga, manamadanga, vinayam viya, temmadanga porudadakka isayal mayaladanga aatral theya, தம்மடங்கு முனிவரையும் தலையடங்க நிலையடங்க சாய்த்த நாளின் மும்மடங்கு பொழிந்தன அம்முறை துறந்தான் உயிர் துறந்த முகங்கள் அம்மா. மும்மடங்கு பொழிந்தன அம்முறை துறந்தான் உயிர் துறந்த முகங்கள் அம்மா. Now I think finally it's interesting that after Ravana's dead, there is some respect paid to his dead body. And part of the reason why the respect is paid to dead body is because his brother Vedanan is there to look after him. Imagine if all the Asuras had died, and I think everybody would have abandoned all of them in the battlefield and left them for dogs and other animals to eat the dead bodies. You'll remember in the last episode we were talking about Kambaramayanam, and Kambaramayanam told Vedanan not to join his side and asked him to stay in Rama's side, because he said, at the least, if all of us die, who is going to do the last rites? And that somewhat happened, I think, when Kamban also describes a scene where when Ravana's body is on the floor, all of the monkey warriors and all of the monkeys were jumping all over his body. And I think when I think of it, I think of many incidences in history where this has happened. When dictators die, we know in modern history also, when Gaddafi was out in the streets on the last day, people were really hitting him, or people were slapping him with their shoes. And this also happened to Mussolini. When Mussolini died, the dictator in Italy died, his body was abused in the streets, and they left him hanging in the corner of a street for many days. I think it was Hitler who was clever. When Hitler was going to die, I think Hitler committed suicide, and he asked his people to burn his body so that it is unrecognizable when the war is won by the Allied forces. So they never found Hitler's body intact. So Kambaramayanam was probably well aware that if all of them died and there was nobody if none of his people were there to look after the dead body, Ravana's body would have been treated exactly the same, thrown to the animals in the battlefield, which is one of the most important reasons he wanted, even though he wanted him to be on the Dharma side, he wanted to really rule over Lanka for many, many years to come. He requested that he be there to do the last rites for the Asuras, and that's what happened at the end, and that's how Kamban finishes by giving respect to the dead body of Ravana lying on the battlefield.
So, in the final analysis, Kamban did not make Ravanan a complete misogynist. He did not make Ravanan entirely narcissistic. Ravanan was not an embodiment of evil. He had several good traits, several laudable traits. He was capable of deep devotion. He did severe penance. He was a master of the Vedas. He was a master of the schools of art. But he was an Asura. who lived true to type and engaged in conquest, and he tried to dominate the worlds. But that is not necessarily wrong. He loved his family and he inspired great loyalty in them. And the evidence for this, every single one of them except for Vedanan sacrificed their life to uphold his unjust desire, to make him achieve his passion. Ravanan was intelligent enough to fear the curses that he had. He knew that if he touched a woman against her will, his head would burst into 1,000 pieces. So for a long time, he did not commit such crimes. In fact, when Kamban introduces Ravanan in the Yudhakandam for the very first time, Kamban says that Ravanan did not have any passion, did not have kamam, he only had viram. But the moment he heard the name Sithai, he transgressed the boundaries that he had set for himself. Even before he set eyes on Sithai, he coveted her. And he coveted her knowing she belonged to another man. He felt a passion for her even when all she felt for him was intense hatred. Ravanan wanted Sithai not only because of his passion, he also wanted Sithai because of his pride and arrogance. He felt that whatever he wanted, he must have. And because of this, he ignored what he had. What he had was just as good as what he pined for. Like it was pointed out, Mandodari was just as beautiful as Sithai. Hanuman mistook her to be Sithai. Ravanan had Mandodari, and yet he went after Sithai. So, this is inexcusable. Ravanan was not an ordinary man. Kumbhakarnan says about Ravanan, "Ayiram marai porul unarndu arivu amaindai." Ravanan had read and understood 1,000 religious texts. Ravanan should have known the difference between right and wrong. Ravanan's arrogance led him to desire Sita. Ravanan's arrogance led him to his death. But in the end, Kamban says that Ravanan is not entirely to blame. Kamban says destiny is to blame. It is Ravanan's fate. Vidiyadu valiyinalum மேல் உள விளைவினால். Ravanan's fall was because of his fate. So, Kamban is quite unwilling to characterize Ravanan as pure evil. Instead, Kamban chooses to make him an anti-hero whose infamy will live for as long as Rama's name does.
Thank you, Priya. I think that was a nice conclusion to today's story. I think we finish off here today, and this concludes the third part of Yudhakandam. And the final part will cover Rama's Pattabhishekam and what happens in Ayodhya on his return back home. Thank you very much for listening once again, and we'll meet again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.